Hey family, how you doing? I'm your brother Vimir Diesel. Gaia, peace to you, peace to your home, peace to your family, peace to your community, peace to your ancestry, peace to my community, peace to my ancestry, and peace to the nation that you, I, and they are building. Peace also to the Godic forces, the great spirit above, the mother below. This, is Mtima Radi. Man, so much has happened, so much has happened, so much has happened. Let's start with the Alabama brawl, as they're calling it. It is often first. Let me give a quick shout out to the god Sekhmet and Ra, the goddess Sekhmet and the god Ra, who we're going to be dealing a little bit with in a few moments. But so there are often these moments in history where they appear to be small. They appear to be insignificant, but they're not. Now, I don't want to overemphasize the idea that this is some great watershed, because it's not. But what this is, what you saw in that brawl, was a trickle. Was a trickle. And family, I am noticing something. I'm hoping this is not showing up on your end, but I'm getting some weird lines. So I'm hoping it's clear on your end. But this is a trickle from from uh, the ancestral soul, the collective soul of black folks, of revenge that is to be merited out if the injuries continue to mount. And the injuries are continuing to mount. Look, family, there is a conversation that we need to have sooner rather than later about our relative relationship to the ancestors and our ancestors' relationship to what we think of as heaven, or what we may also call the divine system, and that divine system's relationship not only to our ancestors, thus us, but to God. And then we have to have a definition for God. I am not in a position presently to give you that definition, nor am I in the position presently to elaborate as to why the definition is necessary. But it is a conversation that will be had at some point in the future. We think of the Egyptian gods and goddesses as just that, gods and goddesses. But black folks are smarter than that. We know there's an overall creator force that is behind them. And we know oftentimes that creator force remains unexplored, wink, or unnamed, wink, or both, wink. We're not dumb. But this is going to have to be something that is talked about. Because what we call the church is not just the church. It's a series of temples in the black community, which we have failed to care for in many instances, because we look at them similarly as we do the church in the white community. Only some of the oldest of elders, understands the reverence and relevance of the black church in comparison to the white church. There is going to be, in the next 10 to 40 years, a rebranding, quote unquote, of the white church and a restructuring of the black church. The rebranding of the white church is not yet clear, but it's coming. They have two paths before them. The one is quite frightening. White nationalist, white Arius nationalist, white Euro-Aryan nationalist is the one path that they seem destined to be on. Oh, and the ancestors call it the white Aryan nationalist European church, which actually spells wank. um, the other path is more of a social gospel tenor. Unfortunately, um, the second seems more impossible than the first because the first has entrenched institutional force behind it, and those institutions are not going to break down as easily as some may think. In fact, back in 2008, when it looked like there was a breakdown, when the newer generation was coming up to say we need to take care of X, Y, and Z and not worry so much about, you know, gay marriage and such, um, the church, the white church, dealt with them harshly, literally derailing, promising, dozens of promising people's career because they were not right wing white supremacist enough. Beyond that, though, as far as it goes with the black church, the restructuring, which will be coming shortly, I mean, this is going to be happening within the next 10 years and carrying on for much of the next 40, will surround the reinstitutionalization. Wrong word, but that's the word they give me, so I'm going to use it. Reinstitutionalization of our ancestral memories. It's coming back, y'all. Who we were, why we were, how we were, and who the European was, why they were, and why they were supposed to be. The restructuring of the black church, the reinstitutionalization of the ancestral memory at the nucleus of that church is going to have profound, profound, profound consequences when we look at how the church um, interacts with the community, and not only interacts with the community, but its place in the upcoming unfoldment of the new community structure. There's a lot that's going to be happening in the next 10 to 40 years. And the fear of a lot of white folks is that we are going to say the hell with them and do our own thing, which we need to. There's a lesson in the Bible which I love because it is instructive. Um, if you read the Bible, dissect it section by section. Do not try to do it as one big whole. Treat the first 5 books as if they are spectacular by themselves. Read them over and over and over again and make sure that you understand some of the nuances in the stories that are there. To get a better understanding of the nuances, you can pull down the book, um, the myths and legends of ancient Israel. It's a thick little book. I've showed it on here before. You can use that. There is a bigger collection with like 27 volumes in it, but that's hard to find, and most of us don't have like $4,000 laying around to get it. But we, for those who do read the Bible, read those first 5 like they are separate from the rest. it'll award you well. But so there's a story there in Exodus when finally they are allowed to leave Egypt. Amongst the group leaving, and it says right there in the Bible, are hundreds, maybe hundreds of thousands of Egyptians. You are going to see increasingly, and we are not ready for this. 1 second, fam. All right, I'm back. But you are going to see increasingly that a lot of non-black people are going to be siding with us because they feel the tenor of this country shifting towards us. Something we have often ignored, and we need to stop doing that, is the fact that white people, for good or for bad, have this intuitive nature to them, which helps them to gauge power balance. So they are like the moth to a light bulb. They move unconsciously towards power and where power dynamics are shifting towards. What you have seen in the last 20 years is this act in progress. And hang on, fam, I gotta get some more light over here. That's better. We have seen this progress accelerate. And we've seen it accelerate not only because of this intuitive nature of white folks. We have seen it accelerate because in the 90s, and really actually it started in the 80s, there is a unconscious decision. In the 70s, there was a conscious decision to capture black music, and I've talked about this on here. In the 1980s, there was a conscious decision to change the direction of black music. As part of that change came the dilution of black vocals. So the 80s was the first time that you heard black vocals harmonized to dilute their power. And what I mean by that is, whereas and I'm sorry, I completely misspoke that. The 1980s was the first time that you heard black voices computerized, auto-tuned to dilute their power. So I said that incorrectly. I apologize. So what I mean by that is, in the 1970s, computerization and auto-tuning was used to enhance the artistic value of the music that black people were creating. There was some experimentation in the early 80s of just auto-tuned voices that were, I suspect, done for fun. But by the mid and late 80s, you had songs being produced that would allow the black person to sing up until the moment when the true power and scope of their voice would start coming out, and then suddenly auto-tune would be added, and that would dilute their voice. In the early 90s, and this started happening in the late 80s also, black artists returned to their roots. They weren't using auto-tune. They weren't using computerization. They weren't using the effects as much. In fact, they were starting to get away from using the effects, which gave rise to the early 1990s return to kind of a classic R&B sound. Many of you old enough will remember that. Bobby Hemmett once said that early 1990s renaissance of R&B had to be clipped in order to allow white vocals to grow and move to the forefront. Well, it was this comment that kind of stoked me to look more closely at a lot of that music in the 1990s, particularly the mid 1990s. And there was a song by, I believe it was the Boyz II Men song, For a Season of Loneliness, but don't quote me on that, where I noticed they were deliberately cutting their vocals. They were suppressing their vocals at a time period when everybody was screaming and shouting that NSYNC and Backstreet Boys were, uh, the powerful vocals. They were the white boys that could sing. But Boyz II Men, who had ruled the early 90s, weren't putting out music similar to what they were putting out in the 90s. Their vocals were being diluted. That was the first time that I kind of acknowledged it. The second time that I acknowledged it was in 2001. And this actually stood out to me at the time when Casey and JoJo had the hit, I think it was Crazy for You or something like that. I'm going crazy, crazy, crazy. And they were auto-tuning their voice. And there was this moment in the song where for a minute they had been singing normal, 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 normal. And then they go to hit a high note and they kick the auto-tune in, dilute it back down. Recently, I was listening to, I think it was CeCe Winans' Waging War, a really great gospel song that all y'all should be listening to. And in that song, they did the same thing. And it may not, it actually, I don't think it was that song. It was another song that I don't listen to as often. But the woman singing might have been Yolanda Adams, to be honest with you. She was singing perfectly fine. And then she got to a point where she was about to explode up with her vocals. And they auto-tuned it right down. Now, why is this important? Because music, which is not what music is not what we think it is. There is a composite concept in music that creates something new. Music has the capacity to create soul particles that are composite particles, yet they're all new, individualized, that go into you and change you. It is the only man-made structure that is metaphysical, that is a metaphysical structure, that is collaborative, collective, composited, based on who is engaged in the creative process. And that particle is so powerful. Upon entering you, it automatically changes you. What makes it its most brilliant, and not even its most brilliant, what sets music apart from noise is, one, music has a nuclei, which is either ancestral, divine, or angelic. Periodically, there could be a time aspect that is that forms the nuclei. There could be a what we might think of as ideological, revolutionary idea that springs from the social consciousness in the moment that forms the nuclei. But there is always something bigger than the moment at the nuclei of music. With noise, with noise, one second, family. With noise, that nuclei is missing. It is just a unorganized, unintentioned collective of stuff happening, of sounds being created. And in that noise, there could be beauty. In that noise, there could be healing. In that noise, there could be freedom and liberation and all the like. But it is not music. And so we have bore witness to a movement of music, from music, to what the ancestors call, and this came to me the other day, they call it synthetic noise or synth noise. Synth noise. And that synth noise lacks that nuclei. What is dangerous about the synth noise is it purports to be artistic, which means it is constructive, means it is composited, means it forms the outer portion of what we think of as music, but it lacks the nuclei. So what does that mean? When it enters our body and the body tries to integrate it and it breaks it apart so it can integrate it, where that nuclei should be is a vacuum. And that vacuum, see, it's funny because I don't know how best to explain this. I want to say it sucks a part of, onto, it kind of, it almost sucks the soul, but it doesn't suck the soul. It's empty calories. So it almost sometimes blows a hole through the soul. But at the end of the day, you're left empty. You're left empty. And if you are in a state of heightened spiritual awareness when you take this in, or a state of receptivity when you take this in, what happens is that vacuum can create a portal. And that portal, depending on where it enters you, depending on what stage your body is at in breaking this sound down and trying to understand this sound, that portal can be big or small. And that portal can open you, unbeknownst to you, to various degrees of infestation of spiritual energy or attachment by spiritual entities. We have witnessed the destruction of so much of who we are because we don't understand that this process is happening. In fact, recently I've been listening to a lot of Dorothy Norwood. Some of you may know her, some of you may not. She's a gospel singer who, in the late 1990s through the mid 2000s, was trying to lead, and unfortunately, she was advanced in age by then. She was trying to lead a resurgence of true black spiritual Christianity, which is rooted in, thank you, Dr. Obachaka, our voodoo histories. And I've been listening to her and listening to her plead for people to feel the music. There is this one group of videos of her where the music is amazing. I first got turned on to this music back in 2006, and it just buoyed my soul. And she was pleading. She was like, there is a song called The Storm is Almost Gone. And they start playing the music, and very few people are clapping. And she's like, clap, 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 clap. You could watch the video of her doing the song, and you can see that she sees the spiritual deadness in Black people growing. And the reason the spiritual deadness was growing was because the quote music that we were listening to was impacting our souls in a very negative rate, and we didn't know it. We were talking about music sounding good, where the music wasn't actually good, it just sounded good. It wasn't actually good, though. She understood that spiritual deadening was a result of this process. She just didn't know the process. Well, I just talked about it with you. One second, family. I'm back. We are music. We are music. And if we allow our music, or the music that we take in, to become nothing but synthetic noise, which we have allowed it to happen, we are going to create a society or societies based on that synthetic noise that are also synthetic and false and fake. The restructuring of the Black church will have to take into account this new reality, this new metaphysical reality. There are some of you who are going to listen to this video and going to think, well, the Black church is useless, worthless, we don't need it, so why are we caring about it? You don't know your history then. You don't know your history. What you need to understand is that the Black church has been compromised. The ancestors told me this back in 2019. When you allow Satan into the sanctuary, don't be surprised when he turns it into a den of hell. And that's what's happened. You see, white folks have taken a lot of our leaders in the Black church and educated them in a way that makes them less agreeable to the changes and needs that are in the interest of our community. In fact, far too many Black preachers are interested in integration efforts these days than are interested in taking care of the issues of the Black community, understanding that by doing so, they are putting themselves in position to help other peoples. We are the only group of people in this country that don't seem to get that. We want to help everybody, but we end up helping very few because we don't take care of our own. So the new structure of the church, well, I can't talk a lot about it here. But what I can tell you is, just as there are what's called important churches in the church system now, there are going to be new temples that are arising over the next 60 years for Black folks throughout this country and this world. These temples are going to be very different than what you see today, but they're also going to be very similar. The Catholic Church, it's going to be revealed, has stolen significant um, historical artifacts from Africans. And those artifacts are key to realizing the destiny of the planet, and not only the planet, but Black people in general. We are going to finally get done with this idea that in order to have a spiritual tradition, it has to rely on a relationship with God that is subservient. And we are going to build new institutions that do not rely on state power or power in general to give themselves credibility. No, they're going to rely on people power to give themselves credibility. And that people power is going to be thick and heavy. The restructuring of this institution is going to be mighty. And it's going to coincide with a new um, upsurge in Kemetic thought practices. So, how does this all tie in with the brawl in Mobile, Alabama? Well, it doesn't. It doesn't. But what the ancestors want you to know is as above, so below. As above, so below. As above, so below. In the heavens, and we don't talk about this much, and we need to talk more about it. And Bobby Hemmett and them talked about it wonderfully. In the heavens, you have these clusters of stars that make up what's often termed solar rings. And then you have clusters of those stars, which form bigger clusters of solar ring, or a bigger solar ring. And then that keeps going out further and further and further and further. You have these instruments which other objects circle around. And then you have instruments around those circulating objects that circulate those objects. And it just keeps going out like that until you get to a galaxy, which is the ultimate circulation of all of these forces. We in the Black community fail to learn a very important lesson from the cosmos. We keep thinking we have to get everybody dedicated to the same thing. No. It's the circulation, ladies and gentlemen, that we are missing. It's the circulation. When a small group of elders, 10, 15, 20, 40, 50, 100, has the capacity to hold an idea for an extended period of time and to impart that idea onto 2 or 3 people each, who then hold that idea collectively, working on it. And then they themselves are able to impart it, rather impartial or completely, onto others. Let's say another 2 or 3 people who can then hold on to that idea. What develops is orbiting objects. Now, you would think that it was the ancestors that were at the center of these orbits, but it's not the case. It's not the case. The idea is the center of the orbit. Now, this goes back to the music that I was talking about. Because once you, especially for Black folks, especially since we are the guardians of the water, primal, you need to understand that when they say we hold the guardianship of the water, that's the Hopi. We create, and this is something Dr. Obitashaka talks about often. We create without ever realizing we create. When our intent is creation, that adds force to what we are already capable of, because we create without even thinking about it. Now, when that intent at the center of the group has a nuclei, and I say nuclei, not nucleus, because God works this way, but when that nuclei is divine, meaning there's not just going to be one little itty bitty part contributed from God. No, God's going to give you what you can handle. Thank you, Dr. Obdashaka. But God's also going to give you a little bit more because he wants you to do well with what you have. So there's multiple nuclei, and they're all together in one little bunch. When that intent is driven by the divine and it is held together by the focus of the group, that becomes the center. And it is that center which is the culture that everybody revolves around. And from that original, let's say 100 elders, they imparted it on to 3 people each. That's 300 people. Those are orbiting stars around this center, which itself has orbits. That's the elders. And then from those 3 people that it was imparted on, they hit another 3. So now you go from 100 to 300 to 900. And then those people, they may not be able to hit 3. Maybe they hit 2. So now you have an additional 1,800. But do you see what I'm saying? Mobile, Alabama. That is where the slaves, that dock was literally where enslaved ancestors were disembarked onto land to be sold as human property. But that man threw that hat up. And everybody got this. It's funny how Black Twitter, Black TikTok, Black everything got it. Threw that hat up. My father used to say it, and I never understood that it was real. Hats off now. I'm like, what the hell do you mean? And what's funny is, I knew what he meant, and he never explained it. Hats off now. Oh, shoot, it's on now. Never had to. My father been dead for almost 30 years, y'all. For almost 30 years. I never had to have him explain it to me. That was just common sense for me. Hats off. That man, in the response that he has garnered, a new nuclei was thrown down by the ancestors. Oh, a new nuclei was thrown down by the ancestors, and God blessed it. The angels blessed it. The Orishas blessed it. The African gods that we don't even know the names of anymore blessed it. And they said, let's get this on. But understand, this ain't the first one, y'all. But it's going to be the first one, y'all. If you know what I'm saying. They ain't joking no more. A new day has come. And we are just in the early mornings. We are at like 2 o'clock in the morning right now. The sun hasn't even come up yet. This tuned the hearts of Black folks a little bit more. The compass has been turned just a little bit more. And people feel it. Now, I want to rush on here because the ancestors are getting impatient because I'm not jumping to the thing that they really want me to talk to you about quickly. They want me to talk with you excuse me, about a correlating event that took place several years ago. Because this is all connected, they say. Mention Trayvon Martin. I remember on one of the TikTok Stitch videos that I saw from the sister who I often watch her videos. She's awesome. One of the black people said, look, we couldn't be there for Trayvon, but we can be here for this man. We can and we will and we are. Do you know how powerful a statement that was? Trayvon Martin happened in early 2012. It's 11 years later, and black people are still saying, I couldn't be there for Trayvon Martin, but I'm about to be here for this. Why? Because something that has been unspoken is that a lot of black people look at the whole Derek Chauvin thing, killing George Floyd, and we're pissed at it. Still. Why? Because some of us would have had to die that day to get Chauvin off of his throat. I had a brother tell me, and he ain't, like, I'm dark skinned, but this brother was darker than me and a little bit taller. Okay, quite a bit taller and muscular. And he said, I'm telling you what, if that was me, I wouldn't have been filming. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, man, I would have ran over there and choked that little pig out. And I'm like, man, stop it. You ain't. He looked at me. You know how black men get, right? When they're talking and you're like, man, you're just kicking some mess. And they suddenly go, look at me. Look, I ain't joking. I ain't joking. I would have died that day. But that brother wouldn't have. That's what he pulled on me. And I was like, yo, all right, man, I believe you. I believe you. He's like, I ain't the one. I wouldn't have been filming, man. My mother would have been burying me, but I would have gotten his knee off of that man's throat. A lot of black people feel that. A lot of black people feel that. And, somebody had said, well, what if them white boys were strapped? And they decided to start popping off some hot lead over there. You don't think there were some brothers in that? Oh, there would have been a shootout. But I'm not engaged. I'm not encouraging none of that. I'm just telling you the truth. Y'all know what would have happened. Not every black person don't know how to shoot a gun. And I'm not talking about just shooting a gun. I'm talking about aiming to disable. Anyway, Trayvon Martin. But the big one, and it's funny because Eric Gardner is often kind of left aside. The big one was Michael Brown, and I'm going to get to that in a moment because there was something that the Ancestors gave me way back when that I don't know if I've talked about it on here. But what Eric Gardner contributes to all of this is the stereotypical, the black man was doing something illegal, even though he wasn't. He was sort of a pillar of the streets, trying to keep peace, and he was killed for it. People often overlook the idea that Eric Gardner wasn't actually doing nothing wrong. Everybody's like, oh, well, he was selling loose cigarettes. No, he wasn't. Look at the video again. Look at the video again, which, by the way, can I just say, think about the impact of Eric Gardner. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. A lot of people are just hearing I can't breathe from George Floyd, but Eric Gardner was the actual first one to say it. You see what I'm saying? The nuclei is building. And then comes Michael Brown. There is a secret to the whole Michael Brown thing that has never been discussed, ladies and gentlemen. Well, no, that's incorrect. There is this brother named Muhammad. I can't remember I think it was Derek Muhammad, but don't quote me on that. He was on a AM radio station, and he was putting out information that he was researching on the Michael Brown thing, and he was talking about some of the things that didn't make sense about the Michael Brown episode, including the fact that the FBI seemed very interested in Dorian Johnson. It's what it is, right? Well, the ancestors told me back in 2020, I'm sorry, not 2020, 2014, that Michael Brown was trying to tell people something and people weren't listening. I'm setting aside Dorian Johnson here because he has less to do with it right now. Michael Brown had been approached to become an undercover snitch. He had been approached to become an informant. And whereas he first took up the offer because he thought they were going to be ridding the community of people who are doing harm in the community. He soon, and he wasn't approached like when he was 18, y'all. They approached him when he was like 14, 15. I think he was literally 14. And I remember I had a dream about him after his death. And he was sitting with me and some others. And he was like, man, it wasn't supposed to go down like this, man. I had plans. I was going to this, that, this. And I was like, I was just there. I was an observer. I wasn't actually the guy doing the interview. But I was stunned. Like, what am I watching? Because this is when I was starting to really get deep into my spiritual stuff. So I didn't understand some of the stuff that I was experiencing. And he goes, he was pissed because I told him no. And the person who was actually doing the quote interview was this black woman. And she was like, who? And I forget the guy's freaking name now, but the police officer who shot him. And I then saw what happened. In a very quick, brief flash of images, I saw what happened. Michael Brown, when he had posted on his Facebook page a week before he was murdered, that, people can say whatever they want about him, but they can never say that he didn't care about his people. That was because he had told the person who was recruiting him to go to hell. Because he had witnessed them frame some black people for some stuff that they didn't do. And they literally framed them because these cats were trying to do good in the community. And he was pissed about it. And he was like, I ain't getting involved in that garbage. So he walked away. He was about to go to college with that knowledge in his head to fuel him into building something greater. He had the secret of what was wrong in the black community. He knew it. He understood it. When that white officer saw him, that white officer was part of the outreach group. And he said that, go back and listen to the accounts of what that officer said happened. Because it's inconsistent. It doesn't actually flow with like, okay, well, wait a minute. It went from this to this really quickly. He said he looked at Brown and said, come over here. I want to talk to you for a minute. Okay, well, that means they're familiar. That means they kind of know each other. Sort of weird, right? Kind of like the Chauvin and George Floyd thing. That got buried very quickly with the Chauvin and George Floyd thing, that they might have had an interaction prior, which would have made it premeditative murder, which would have put that man in prison for much of his life, but they didn't want to do it because he's a cop. Anyway, Brown came over, and the white officer said, why are you leaving? Why are you not doing da-da-da-da-da-da-da? And Michael Brown was like, I'm done. I ain't getting involved in this mess, man. It's crazy. And the white officer said, oh, well, I think you are. Look, you need to understand, things can get very hairy for you if you go down this route. Because you know stuff, you've seen stuff, you've been involved in stuff, none of which I know as a person. It's just, this is what was in my dream. And the guy was like, Michael Brown was like, I don't care. I'm done. And frankly, I have no interest in getting anybody in trouble or doing that. I'm just trying to live my life. And that ain't a part of it. And there was a threat made on behalf of some other folks. And Michael Brown was basically like, I ain't scared of y'all. Y'all, what y'all gonna do? Put me in jail? Whatever. I know half the people in jail. We're good. Go ahead. No one's gonna touch me in there. And that's when things got next level. The officer pulled his gun and said, "You ain't going to jail. These cats they ain't gonna put you in jail." And he said, "Oh, nope, I'm out." And the guy said, "No, you're not." And that's when the white officer grabbed him, and the two of them started struggling. There was a gun that popped off. It was his. That made Brown run. The officer got out the car, drew the gun, shot it once, warning. Brown stopped, hands up, turned around. "All right, man. All right. All right. You win. You win. Let's talk. Let's talk." And that's when, doom, 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 doom. No talk. No talk. What is hidden in the dark shall be brought forward into the light. We are in a new time, family. The interesting thing about the George Floyd murder, I'm sorry, not the George Floyd murder, the Michael Brown murder, was it took place in Missouri. Missouri is in the middle of the country. It is also the place where the what was it? The Was it Plessy versus Ferguson case took place, where it was determined that the black man has no rights, that the white man has to respect. That happened in that same state. It's literally, and the ancestors showed me this back in 2014, it is literally the center of the country. It is the center of the black community, therefore, in this, or the African diaspora in the United States. That triggered a cosmic explosion, which set us on the path of creating these nuclei, which are bounded together to form this new force, which we are all now starting to circle around. Sandra Bland's death. No, not. Am I thinking about the right one? Sandra Bland was shot, wasn't she? One second, family. It is Sandra Bland. Had to make sure. Because they dropped it in so quickly. I was like, whoa, okay. So Sandra Bland, who was not shot, she's the one where there were some pictures floating around which really looked like they had staged her body and then took her photograph to make it look like she came in alive. Whether or not they did that, there is something about revealing these incidences via video and photography, which is helping to accelerate the creation of this nucleus center. And with her death, the feminine component, which we also saw with the sister in Memphis, was added to this nuclei. And the dangerous part about adding the black feminine component to the cultural nuclei is it magnifies it. It's no longer a process that is depending on sheer numeric strength. It is now a process that can tap history. That is what we are looking at. This was always the danger of targeting and killing extrajudicially black women and black girls, particularly black menstruating women or black pregnant women, because that adds to the cultural nuclei a force of emphasis of retaliation. You remember when the sister during George Floyd's death spoke the truth that many black folks wish somebody would say? You're lucky that we are seeking um, reconciliation and not revenge. The ancestors want you to know that they put those words in her mouth. And the fact of the matter is, the ancestors are no longer seeking reconciliation. They are now seeking revenge. Now, revenge does not have to be violent. That's what they keep telling me, and I understand that. Revenge can be, you simply give me what's owed my people, and there's going to be no issue. There's going to be no imbalance. There's going to be nothing. It's karma. That's what revenge is. The idea of revenge is not what white people have often put forward. It's not about violent retaliation. Revenge is about the taking the suture, or not the suture, I'm sorry, the wound which has been created by actions in time, and suturing it, making it whole, making it complete, making it not necessarily irrelevant, but making it so there is no hurt that is associated with it. That's what revenge is all about. And the ancestors are now at the point where they're like, yeah, this is where we're at. So all of these energies have been buoyed heavily by what happened in Mobile. And let's also be clear about one other thing that buoyed it. We saw way back in 2020 black folks who play sports who said, we are taking a stand for something. We want something to happen, X, and if X don't happen, we're not playing. That happened in Alabama. That happened in Missouri. And because those black football players said, we done, a lot of the white football players said, I ain't going out there either. No. And stuff happened. There's a quick book that I want to drop for you guys here. This is from a branch of psychology. This is an older book, so there's a much more newer ones, even though I often think the classics should be consulted. This is something that every black person should know something about. Something that every black person, particularly if you play a sport, should know something about. We do not talk enough about sports psychology in the black community. Sports psychology is huge. I dropped some of these books on my video on sports, when I was talking about DeMar Hamlin. But for us, sport is a way of life. And when you combine sports psychology, which is about determination of accomplishing goals, when you take sports psychology and you apply it to activism, academia, family, it's a new day, new age. It's a new day, new age. And recognizing we are in a new day. The sun is up. Well, technically not, it's 2 a.m. But the sun is coming. You better be ready. Now, I know I said soon I'm going to have to deal with SOCMED and Ra and what have you, but not on this video. Yeah, I kind of threw that in there because in the future I will be doing a video on Sekhmet and Ra and uh, this this global warming, boiling um, reality that we have to deal with. Question, comments, concerns, leave them below. I'm your brother, Vimir Deez. Oh, Gaia. See you on the next one, y'all.